The dress had been white that morning, but now it carried the dust of 5 hours waiting, and Faith Reeves could feel every grain of it against her skin as she sat alone on the church steps in El Paso, Texas, watching the sun climb higher into the merciless August sky of 1878. She had arrived at dawn with her aunt and uncle, trembling with nervous excitement, her veil carefully arranged, her hands clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers that had long since wilted in the heat. Gerald Pritchard was supposed to meet her at 6 in the morning, before the day grew too hot, before the town fully woke. They had planned everything so carefully over the past 6 months, ever since his family had moved to El Paso from Ohio. He had courted her properly, spoken to her uncle, made all the right promises. The wedding was supposed to be small, just the preacher and a few witnesses, but it was supposed to be real. By 7, her aunt had started making excuses. The roads were rough, perhaps his wagon had broken a wheel. By 8, her uncle had ridden out to the Pritchard Ranch, 5 miles west of town. By 9, he had returned with news that made Faith's blood run cold. The house was empty. The family had packed up and left in the night, taking everything with them. No note, no explanation, just gone. Her aunt had tried to take her home then, but Faith could not move. Some stubborn part of her refused to believe it, refused to accept that the man who had kissed her hand and called her his future, his everything, had simply disappeared like morning mist. So she had sent her aunt and uncle away, promising she would come home soon, and she had stayed on those church steps, waiting, hoping, praying that there had been some terrible mistake. Now it was past 11, and the few people who had drifted by had looked at her with pity or carefully averted their eyes. Faith knew what she looked like, sitting there in her wedding dress like a ghost, like something tragic and pathetic. She should leave. She should stand up and walk back to her uncle's house and burn this dress and try to forget this day had ever happened. But her legs would not cooperate, and her eyes kept searching the dusty street for any sign of a wagon, any sign of Gerald. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, hope flaring painfully in her chest before she saw it was just a single rider, not the wagon she had been watching for. The man sat tall in his saddle, his horse a striking paint with patches of brown and white. He wore the practical clothing of someone who spent his life on the trail, dusty leather chaps over worn trousers, a dark shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. As he drew closer, Faith could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that was both rugged and surprisingly kind. He slowed his horse as he passed the church, his gaze falling on Faith. She saw his expression change, saw the way his eyes took in her wedding dress, the wilted flowers on the step beside her, the obvious fact that she was alone. He brought his horse to a complete stop, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. "Madam," he said finally, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and carried a slight drawl that suggested he had been raised somewhere further south. "I do not mean to intrude, but are you all right?" The question was so absurd given the circumstances that Faith almost laughed. Instead, she heard herself say, "I am waiting for someone." The cowboy glanced up at the sun, then back at her. "How long have you been waiting?" 5 hours, Faith said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it had not been before. 5 hours. 5 hours of sitting here like a fool, believing in promises that had been nothing but lies. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, leaving his horse to stand patiently as he approached the church steps. Up close, Faith could see that his eyes were a remarkable shade of gray, like storm clouds, and they were looking at her with genuine concern. 5 hours in this heat, he said quietly. That is a long time to wait for anyone. "He was supposed to marry me," Faith said, and her voice finally cracked. "We were supposed to be married this morning, but he left. His whole family left in the night. They are gone." The cowboy's expression darkened. "Someone left you here, left you waiting at the church," Faith nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Madam, I do not know who this man was," the cowboy said, and there was an edge of anger in his voice now, though Faith sensed it was not directed at her. "But he is a fool, the biggest fool I have ever heard of." He paused, then added softly, "And I am not." Faith looked up at him, confused. "What?" "I mean I am not fool enough to leave a woman like you waiting anywhere," he said. "I am not fool enough to break a promise to someone who clearly has enough faith to sit here for 5 hours in the August sun, hoping." He held out his hand. "My name is Lucas Donovan, and I think you need to get out of this heat before you make yourself sick." Faith stared at his outstretched hand. She did not know this man. She had never seen him before in her life. But there was something in his eyes, something honest and steady that Gerald's eyes had never quite held, and she found herself reaching out to take his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and he helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Faith swayed slightly, realizing for the first time how lightheaded she felt. The heat, the shock, the hours of waiting had taken their toll. "Easy," Lucas said, his other hand coming to her elbow to steady her. "When did you last drink water?" "This morning," Faith admitted. "Before dawn." Lucas muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. "There is a restaurant 2 streets over. Let me get you there, get some water and food in you. Then I will take you home, wherever that is." "I do not need charity," Faith said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It is not charity," Lucas said firmly. "It is basic human decency, and right now you need it whether you want to admit it or not." He was right, and Faith was too tired to argue. She let him guide her down the steps, though she balked when she saw his horse. "I cannot ride in this dress." Lucas considered for a moment, then said, "Can you walk 2 streets?" "Yes," Faith said, grateful that he did not suggest she ride side saddle or some other complicated arrangement. He took his horse's reins and walked beside her, matching his pace to her slower steps. Faith was acutely aware of the picture they must make. A woman in a wedding dress walking down the street with a strange cowboy, but she found she did not care. Let the town talk. They would talk anyway, about how Faith Reeves had been left at the altar, about how Gerald Pritchard had made a fool of her. The restaurant was blessedly cool inside, with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the heat. The woman behind the counter took one look at Faith and immediately rushed to bring water. Faith drank an entire glass before she even sat down, and Lucas ordered food without asking what she wanted, which should have annoyed her but instead felt like a relief. "I do not even know you," Faith said when the food arrived, simple but hearty stew with fresh bread. She had not realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. "You do not," Lucas agreed, eating his own meal with the efficient manner of someone used to eating quickly. "But you know I am not the kind of man who leaves a woman waiting at a church." "That is a low bar," Faith said, but she felt a small smile tug at her lips despite everything. "Maybe," Lucas said, "but it is a start." He paused, then asked, "Do you have family here, people taking care of you?" "My aunt and uncle," Faith said. "They raised me after my parents died. They are good people. This is not their fault." "I did not think it was," Lucas said. "Do they know where you are?" "I sent them home hours ago," Faith admitted. "I told them I needed time alone." "I suspect they are worried," Lucas said gently. "When you are ready, I will take you back to them." Faith ate slowly, feeling strength return to her body even as her heart remained bruised. She studied Lucas across the table, this strange man who had stopped for her when he had no reason to. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Most people have just walked past all morning." Lucas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "My sister," he said finally. 3 years ago, she was engaged to a man we all thought was decent. He left her standing at the church, too. Not for as long as you waited, but long enough. It broke something in her, that waiting. She was never quite the same after." He looked up at Faith. "I saw you sitting there, and I saw her. I could not just ride past." "Where is your sister now?" Faith asked softly. "Married to a good man in San Antonio," Lucas said, and there was warmth in his voice. "It took her a long time to trust again, but she found someone worthy of her. She is happy now." "So there is hope for pathetic, jilted women," Faith said, trying for levity but hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "You are not pathetic," Lucas said, and his tone was so firm it made Faith look up. "You are someone who keeps her promises. You are someone with enough loyalty to wait 5 hours for a man who did not deserve 5 minutes of your time. Those are not flaws. Those are strengths, even if they got you hurt today." Faith felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself all day. "I feel like a fool." "The only fool in this story is the man who left," Lucas said. "Remember that." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Lucas paid for both of them, waving off Faith's protests. Outside, the heat was even more oppressive than before, the sun directly overhead now. Faith gave Lucas directions to her uncle's house on the eastern edge of town, and he walked beside her again, his horse plodding patiently behind them. Faith's aunt saw them coming from the window and rushed out before they even reached the door. "Faith! Oh, Faith, we have been so worried. Your uncle is out looking for you again." She looked at Lucas with confusion and a hint of suspicion. "Who is this?" "Lucas Donovan, madam," Lucas said, removing his hat respectfully. "I found your niece at the church. She had been sitting in the sun for a long time without water. I took her to get food and drink, and now I am returning her to you safely." Faith's aunt, Harriet Reeves, was a sharp woman who had raised Faith with love, but also with a practical eye toward the world's dangers. She looked Lucas up and down, clearly trying to determine if he was a threat or a help. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because her expression softened. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. That was kind of you." "Anyone would have done the same," Lucas said. "They did not," Faith said quietly. "Dozens of people walked past me this morning. You were the only one who stopped." Lucas looked uncomfortable with the praise. He turned to Faith. "Will you be all right?" Faith did not know how to answer that. Would she be all right? Eventually, perhaps. But right now, she felt like her entire future had crumbled to dust. "I do not know," she said honestly. "But thank you for stopping. Thank you for caring when you had no reason to." "I had reason," Lucas said. "You needed help." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, I will be in town for a few days. I am staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. If there is anything I can do, anything at all, please send word." "Why would you do that?" Faith asked. "You do not owe me anything." "Because someone should have been there for my sister, and no one was," Lucas said simply. "I cannot change that, but I can be here for you if you need it." He tipped his hat to both women, mounted his horse with easy grace, and rode away, leaving Faith staring after him with a confused tangle of emotions in her chest. Harriet ushered Faith inside, helping her out of the wedding dress that now felt like a mockery. Faith's uncle, Thomas Reeves, returned an hour later, relieved to find his niece home safe. Over dinner, they discussed what to do next. Thomas had spoken to the sheriff, but there was nothing illegal about a family leaving town, even if they had left a bride waiting. Gerald and his family were gone, and there was no way to force them back, no way to demand an explanation. "We will get through this," Harriet said, holding Faith's hand across the table. "I know it feels impossible right now, but we will get through it." Faith nodded, but she felt numb. She excused herself early and went to her small bedroom, staring at the ceiling as darkness fell. She kept thinking about Lucas Donovan, about the way he had looked at her with such genuine concern, about what he had said. Someone is a fool, and I am not. It should not matter what a stranger thought, but somehow it did. Somehow, in the midst of the worst day of her life, that one act of kindness had been a lifeline. The next morning, Faith forced herself out of bed. She could not hide in her room forever, no matter how much she wanted to. She helped her aunt with the household chores, focusing on the familiar rhythms of work to keep her mind from spiraling. But everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of Gerald. The corner where he had stood talking with her uncle. The porch where he had kissed her for the first time. The road he had ridden down so many times, always with a smile and a promise. All lies, she thought bitterly. All of it had been lies. In the afternoon, a knock came at the door. Faith answered it to find a young boy she recognized from town, holding a small package. "Delivery for Miss Faith Reeves," he said. Faith took the package, confused. Inside was a book, its cover worn but still beautiful, and a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "I thought you might need something to take your mind elsewhere for a while. This was my sister's favorite book during her difficult time. She wanted me to pass it on to someone who might need it. Lucas Donovan." Faith opened the book to find it was a collection of adventure stories, tales of far-off places and daring escapes. On the inside cover, another hand had written, "For the next woman who needs to remember that there are bigger worlds than the one breaking your heart right now. You will get through this. Sarah Donovan." Faith felt tears sting her eyes, but they were different from yesterday's tears. These were tears of gratitude, of recognition that even in her pain, there was still kindness in the world. She held the book close and sat down to read. Over the next 3 days, Faith read every story in that book, sometimes twice. Each tale took her further from El Paso, from wedding dresses and broken promises, and into worlds where people overcame impossible odds and found their own strength. She thought about Lucas Donovan and his sister Sarah, about the way pain could be transformed into compassion for others. On the 4th day, Faith made a decision. She dressed in her simplest day dress and walked into town asking directions until she found the boarding house on 3rd Street. The proprietor, an elderly woman with kind eyes, told her that Mr. Donovan was in the small courtyard out back, tending to his horse. Faith found him there, brushing down the paint horse with long, methodical strokes. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and something like relief crossed his face. "Miss Reeves," he said. "Are you well?" "Better than I was," Faith said. "I wanted to return your book and thank you properly." "Keep the book," Lucas said. "That is why I sent it." "I cannot," Faith said. "It was your sister's. It means something." "It means something to her that it goes to someone who needs it," Lucas said. "She would be glad to know it helped you." Faith held the book to her chest. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Lucas set down his brush and turned to face her fully. "You are not nothing," he said quietly. "You are someone who deserved better than what happened to you. You are someone strong enough to sit for 5 hours holding on to hope, which takes more courage than most people have. And if I can make even a small part of your pain easier, why would I not?" "Most people are not like you," Faith said. "Most people are not like you either," Lucas countered. "Most people would have given up after an hour." They stood in the courtyard as the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, and Faith felt something shift in her chest. This was not the stomach-flipping excitement she had felt with Gerald, but something steadier, deeper. A recognition of character, perhaps. A sense that she was seeing someone truly good. "How long are you staying in El Paso?" Faith asked. "I was planning to leave tomorrow," Lucas said. I have been traveling for months, working ranches where they need hands seeing the country, but I can stay longer if there is a reason to. Faith knew she should not ask. It was too soon, too fast. She barely knew this man, but the words came anyway. Would you stay if I asked you to? Lucas looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said simply. I would. Then I am asking, Faith said. I do not know what I am asking for exactly. I just know that I would like to know you better. I would like to understand how you became the kind of man who stops for strangers. A slow smile spread across Lucas's face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made Faith's heart skip. I would like that too, he said. I would like to know how you became someone who waits 5 hours in the August sun for a promise. That might not be a good quality, Faith said ruefully. It is, Lucas said firmly. You just gave it to the wrong person. That does not make the quality itself bad. Over the following weeks, Lucas and Faith began to build something neither of them had quite expected. Lucas found work at a ranch outside of town, but he came to visit Faith every Sunday, bringing small gifts that showed he paid attention to her words. A ribbon in her favorite color. A cutting from a plant she had mentioned admiring. A newspaper from San Antonio with a letter from his sister, telling Faith that she was glad the book had found its way to someone who needed it. They took long walks in the cooler evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas told her about growing up on a small farm in Louisiana, about how his parents had died of fever when he was 20, leaving him and Sarah to fend for themselves. He talked about the years of wandering that followed, working wherever he could, learning the skills that kept him employed even in hard times. He spoke of his sister's wedding, of the joy of seeing her happy again after so much pain. Faith told him about her own losses, her parents dying in a cholera outbreak when she was 12, the way her aunt and uncle had taken her in without question. She spoke about the loneliness of growing up the only child in a household, about how Gerald had seemed like the answer to that loneliness, someone who saw her and wanted her. He did not see you, Lucas said when she finished. If he had really seen you, he never could have left. Maybe I was not worth staying for, Faith said, voicing the fear that had haunted her since that morning at the church. Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. Faith, look at me. When she did, he continued, You are worth staying for. You are worth fighting for, worth choosing every single day. The fact that one foolish man did not see that says everything about him and nothing about you. Do you understand? Faith felt tears threaten again, but she blinked them back. I want to believe that. Then believe it, Lucas said. And if you cannot believe it on your own, believe me when I tell you it is true. As summer faded into autumn, Faith found herself thinking less and less about Gerald Pritchard, and more about the man who had stopped when no one else did. Lucas was patient with her in a way Gerald had never been, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to build their relationship slowly and carefully. He met her aunt and uncle properly, sitting through Thomas's pointed questions with honest answers and steady respect. He attended church with them, worked hard at his job, and built a reputation in El Paso as a reliable, decent man. In October, 6 months after that awful morning at the church, Lucas took Faith on a ride out into the desert. They brought a picnic lunch and spent the afternoon watching the landscape change colors as the sun moved across the sky. The heat of summer had finally broken, leaving the air crisp and clear. I need to tell you something, Lucas said as they sat on a blanket, the remains of their meal scattered around them, Faith's heart clenched with sudden fear. What is it? Nothing bad, Lucas said quickly, reading her expression. At least, I hope you will not think it is bad. He took her hand in his. Faith, these past 6 months have been the best of my life. I came to El Paso planning to stay a few days and move on. I have moved on from every place I have been since my parents died, never finding a reason to put down roots. But then I met you, and suddenly I had a reason. Lucas, Faith whispered, but he continued. I know it has only been 6 months. I know you were hurt badly, and I know you need time. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or next month or even next year. I just need you to know that I am here and I am staying. I bought land from the ranch owner, 20 acres with a good water source. I'm going to build a house there, a real home. And I am building it because I want a future here with you if you will have me. Faith felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were good tears. You bought land. I did, Lucas said. Because I am not going anywhere. I am not running. I am not leaving. I am here, Faith, for as long as you will let me be. Faith launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking them both over. Lucas caught her, his arms coming around her securely. Is that a yes? He asked, laughter in his voice. That is a yes, Faith said against his shoulder. Yes to a future. Yes to letting you stay. Yes to all of it. Lucas pulled back just enough to see her face. Can I kiss you? Faith nodded, and when his lips met hers, it was nothing like the kisses she had shared with Gerald. Those had been pleasant but forgettable. This was fire and promise and coming home all at once. This was real. They took their time after that, building Lucas's house together over the winter months. Faith helped with the planning, choosing where windows should go, how the kitchen should be laid out. Her uncle and several men from town helped with the actual construction. And by spring of 1879, the house stood complete, simple but sturdy, with a porch that faced east to catch the sunrise. Lucas proposed properly in April, kneeling in the parlor of her aunt and uncle's house with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. Faith said yes without hesitation, and this time when she began planning a wedding, there was no anxiety, no secret doubt. There was only certainty. They were married in June in the same little church where Faith had waited, but this time everything was different. This time the church was full of friends and well-wishers. This time the groom arrived an hour early, pacing nervously until Faith appeared in a new dress, pale blue instead of white, with wildflowers in her hair. This time when they spoke their vows, Faith knew with absolute certainty that the man standing across from her would keep every promise he made. The celebration afterward was lively, with music and dancing and food that Harriet and the other women of the town had been preparing for days. Lucas danced with Faith until her feet ached, and then they slipped away to the house he had built, the house that was now theirs. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, both of them nervous despite their months of growing intimacy. Lucas was patient, attentive, making sure Faith felt safe and cherished. When she fell asleep in his arms afterward, she felt a peace she had not known was possible. The first years of their marriage were busy and fulfilling. Lucas worked hard to build up their small ranch, starting with a few head of cattle and gradually expanding. Faith turned their house into a home, sewing curtains, planting a garden, learning to cook the meals Lucas loved. They settled into rhythms together, the daily patterns of work and rest, of talking late into the night and waking up intertwined. Sarah and her husband visited in the fall of 1879, and Faith finally met the woman whose book had been such a comfort. Sarah was warm and funny, with eyes that had known pain but had found joy on the other side. The two women became fast friends, and when Sarah left, she hugged Faith tightly and whispered, "Thank you for making my brother so happy. He deserves it." "He saved me," Faith whispered back. "No," Sarah said firmly. "He helped you. You saved yourself by being strong enough to accept that help and build something new. Never forget that." In the spring of 1880, Faith discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, watching his face cycle through shock, joy, and wonder in quick succession. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby, we are," Faith confirmed, laughing as he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. Lucas was attentive to the point of being overprotective during her pregnancy, constantly worrying about her health, her comfort, whether she was eating enough. Faith tolerated it with good humor, knowing it came from love. When her labor began on a cold November night, Lucas rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife, then stayed by Faith's side through every contraction, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Their son was born just after dawn, a healthy baby with a strong cry and dark hair like his father. They named him Thomas after Faith's uncle, and when Lucas held his son for the first time, Faith saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "You are perfect." "I love you so much." "I love you too," Faith said, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for choosing us." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Best decision of my entire life." Thomas was an easy baby, content and curious about the world. Lucas was a devoted father, always willing to walk the floor at night, to change diapers, to make silly faces until their son giggled. Faith watched them together and felt her heart swell with gratitude for the life they had built. In 1882, Faith became pregnant again, and this time their daughter was born in April, in the midst of a spring rain that broke a long drought. They named her Sarah, after Lucas's sister, and the little girl had her mother's blue eyes and her father's determination. Sarah was more demanding than Thomas had been, wanting attention and entertainment constantly, and Lucas doted on her shamelessly. "You are going to spoil her," Faith warned, watching him carry Sarah around the house, pointing out every object and naming it for her. "That is my job," Lucas said unrepentantly. "I am her father. I am supposed to spoil her." The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area. Lucas had a gift for breeding cattle and training horses, and his reputation brought in steady business. Faith started taking and sewing work, both because she enjoyed it and because the extra income helped them expand. They hired ranch hands during busy seasons, and their home became known as a place of fair treatment and good meals. In 1884, tragedy struck when a neighboring ranch was hit by raiders, the family killed and their livestock stolen. The violence was a reminder that the West, while settling down, was still dangerous. Lucas joined the group of men who tracked the raiders, helping to bring them to justice, but the experience sobered him. He came home and held Faith tightly, burying his face in her hair. "I kept thinking about you and the children," he said, "about what I have to lose. I do not want you to ever be afraid, Faith. I will always come home to you." "I know," Faith said, though her heart had been in her throat the entire time he was gone. "I trust you, Lucas. I trust us." Thomas started school in 1885, riding into town each morning with his father when Lucas had business there. He was a bright child, eager to learn, and Faith was proud of his progress. Sarah, meanwhile, was proving to be as adventurous as her brother was studious, constantly getting into things she should not, exploring every corner of the ranch with fearless curiosity. "She's going to give us gray hair," Faith said one afternoon, after finding Sarah attempting to climb into the horse pen. "She is like you," Lucas said, scooping up his daughter and tickling her until she shrieked with laughter. "Brave and stubborn and absolutely unstoppable." "I was never like that," Faith protested. "You waited 5 hours in the August sun for a promise," Lucas said. "That is the definition of stubborn, and I love you for it." In the late summer of 1886, Faith and Lucas celebrated their 7th anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children were asleep. They sat on their porch, watching the stars come out, reflecting on how far they had come. "You ever think about that day?" Faith asked quietly. "The day you found me at the church, sometimes," Lucas admitted. "I think about how easily I could have just ridden past, how different our lives would be if I had." "I think about it too," Faith said. "I was so broken that day I thought my life was over. And now?" Lucas asked, pulling her close. "Now I know it was just beginning," Faith said. "That awful day led me to you, to this life, to our children. I do not think I would change it even if I could." "I would change the pain you went through," Lucas said firmly. "I would take that away if I could." "But the pain made me ready for you," Faith said. "It taught me the difference between pretty promises and real commitment. It showed me what I did not want, so I could recognize what I did want when you came along." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you on those church steps?" "What?" "I thought you were the saddest and the bravest person I had ever seen," Lucas said. "You were clearly hurting, but you were still hoping. You had not given up. And I thought that anyone with that much courage deserved someone who would fight for them." "So you decided to be that someone?" Faith asked. "I decided to try," Lucas said. "I am just grateful you let me." In 1887, their 3rd child was born, another boy they named James. He came early, during a cold snap in February, and the birth was harder than the previous 2. Faith was exhausted and weak afterward, and for several terrifying days, Lucas feared he might lose her. But Faith was stronger than she looked, and she fought her way back to health, determined not to leave her family. "You scared me," Lucas said when she was finally well enough to sit up and talk. "I scared myself," Faith admitted, "but I am not ready to leave you yet. We have too much life left to live." James proved to be a calm, sweet-tempered baby, content to watch the world from his mother's arms. Thomas, now 7, was fascinated by his new brother, constantly wanting to help. Sarah, at 5, was less interested but fiercely protective, warning anyone who came near that this was her baby brother and they had better be nice. The ranch continued to thrive through the late 1880s, even as the West changed around them. The railroad expanded, bringing new people and new opportunities. El Paso grew from a rough border town into a real city, with schools and churches and businesses. Lucas and Faith grew with it, adapting their operation, finding new markets for their cattle and horses. In 1890, Thomas was 10, Sarah 8, and James 3. Their house was full of noise and life and love. Faith had added on to the original structure, giving each child their own small room, creating a kitchen large enough for the family to gather in. Lucas had built a barn and several outbuildings, corrals for the horses, and a stable that was the envy of the county. One evening in the fall of that year, after the children were in bed, Faith found Lucas sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the land they had built together. She settled beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Lucas said. "I spent so many years drifting, never belonging anywhere, and then I found you, and suddenly I had everything I never knew I needed." "I am the lucky one," Faith said. "You stopped when no one else did. You saw me when I was at my worst and decided I was worth staying for." "You were always worth staying for," Lucas said. "I just had the sense to recognize it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Faith said, "Lucas, do you ever wonder what happened to Gerald Pritchard?" It was the first time she had said his name in years. Lucas looked at her carefully. "Sometimes." "Do you?" "Not often," Faith said honestly. "But occasionally I wonder where he went, why he left, if he ever regretted it." "Does it matter?" Lucas asked gently. Faith considered. "No," she said finally. "I suppose it does not. Whatever his reasons were, whatever happened to him, it does not change what I have now. It does not change us." "Good," Lucas said, "because I do not want you wasting a single thought on a man who did not deserve you." "I am not," Faith assured him. "I am just acknowledging that he existed, that what happened was real. But it is not my story anymore. This is my story. You are my story." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "Best story I have ever heard." In 1892, Faith's Aunt Harriet passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Thomas Reeves came to live with Lucas and Faith for his remaining years. He was grateful for the care they provided and spent his days teaching his great-grandchildren about the old days, telling stories of El Paso when it was still wild and untamed. He passed away in 1894, content and surrounded by family, and Faith mourned him deeply but knew he had lived a full life. The children continued to grow. Thomas became fascinated with books and learning, talking about becoming a lawyer or a teacher. Sarah remained adventurous, spending every moment she could with the horses, showing an uncanny gift for training them. James was quieter than his siblings, but with a kind heart that drew people to him. In 1895, when Faith was 36 and Lucas 38, they found themselves unexpectedly expecting another child. Their children were older now, Thomas 15, Sarah 13, and James 8, and they had assumed their family was complete. But Faith's pregnancy, while tiring, went smoothly, and in early 1896 they welcomed twin girls into the world. "Twins," Lucas said, holding one daughter in each arm, looking completely overwhelmed. "We have twin daughters." "We do," Faith said, laughing despite her exhaustion. "Are you all right?" "I am perfect," Lucas said, though he looked slightly terrified. "I am absolutely perfect. I have no idea how we are going to manage 2 babies at once, but I am perfect." They named the twins Elizabeth and Emma, and the entire family pitched in to help care for them. Thomas was patient and gentle with his baby sisters. Sarah treated them like fascinating puzzles to figure out. James appointed himself their guardian, sitting by their cradle to make sure they were safe. And Lucas, despite his initial overwhelm, proved just as devoted a father to his 5th and 6th children as he had been to the first. The turn of the century found Lucas and Faith in their 40s, with a house full of children ranging from young adults to toddlers. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Thomas had gone off to university in Austin, determined to become a lawyer. Sarah, at 18, was running the horse training side of the ranch with skill that impressed everyone. James was helping his father with the cattle, learning the business from the ground up. And the twins, now 4, were a whirlwind of energy and mischief. On their 20th anniversary in 1899, Lucas took Faith back to the spot where they had their first picnic, the place where he had told her he was buying land and building a home. They left the children with Sarah for the afternoon and spent hours talking and remembering. 20 years, Faith said, marveling. "It feels like no time at all and also a lifetime." "The best lifetime," Lucas said. "I meant what I said that day, you know, that you are worth choosing every single day. That has not changed. If anything, it has only become more true." "I never doubted you," Faith said. "Not after that first year. You showed me who you were and you have never wavered." "Neither have you," Lucas said. "You took a chance on a drifter cowboy who stopped at a church. You built this life with me. You gave me children and a home and a reason to wake up grateful every morning." "We gave those things to each other," Faith corrected. "This is not just your gratitude or my gratitude. This is ours." Lucas pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had on their wedding night, with all the accumulated love of 20 years together. "Here is to the next 20, he murmured against her lips. "And the 20 after that," Faith added. The early 1900s brought changes to the West, as automobiles began appearing on the roads and electricity reached even remote ranches like theirs. Lucas and Faith adapted, always willing to embrace progress while holding on to the values that had built their life. They installed electric lights in 1903, much to the children's delight. They bought their first automobile in 1905, though Lucas still preferred his horses for ranch work. Sarah married in 1904 to a young rancher from a neighboring property, a man Lucas approved of after extensive questioning. The wedding was a joyous celebration, and Faith cried when her daughter said her vows, remembering her own wedding day, how different and how right it had been. Thomas returned to El Paso in 1906 with a law degree and a plan to open a practice. He had grown into a thoughtful, principled man who made his parents proud. James, at 19, had become indispensable to the ranch operation, with a natural skill for managing both animals and people. The twins were 10 and showing distinct personalities. Elizabeth was studious and careful, while Emma was bold and creative. In 1907, at 48, Faith found herself with the first true quiet of her adult life. Thomas had his own home in town. Sarah lived on her husband's ranch, expecting her first child. James was old enough to handle much of the daily ranch work, and the twins were in school most days. For the first time in decades, Faith had time to simply be. "I do not know what to do with myself," she confessed to Lucas one afternoon. "What do you want to do?" Lucas asked. Faith considered. "I want to write," she said, surprising herself. "I want to write down our story and all the stories I have heard over the years. I want to leave something behind that tells people how we lived, what mattered to us." "Then write," Lucas said simply. "We have enough money. The ranch runs smoothly. If writing is what you want to do, then do it." So Faith began to write. She filled notebook after notebook with stories. Their story, the stories of their neighbors, tales of the Old West before it disappeared entirely. She wrote about the day Lucas stopped at the church, about building their home, about raising their children. She wrote about joy and loss, about the way the land changed with the seasons, about what it meant to build a life with intention and love. Lucas would read her pages in the evenings, offering comments and reminders of details she had forgotten. "You should mention the time Sarah got stuck in the well," he said one night. "That was terrifying at the time," Faith said, "though I suppose it makes a good story now." "Everything is a story eventually," Lucas said. "That is what you are doing, turning our life into a story worth telling." In 1908, Sarah had her baby, a healthy boy she named Lucas after his grandfather. Faith held her grandson for the first time and felt the circle of life complete itself. She had been held by her own parents, had held her children, and now held her children's children. It was continuity, legacy, the way love multiplied across generations. Thomas married in 1909 to a schoolteacher from town, a smart woman who matched his intellect and his values. James courted the daughter of a ranch family to the south, a practical girl who could ride and rope as well as any man. The twins, at 13, were becoming young women, still close but also developing their own interests and friendships. Lucas turned 50 in 1909, and Faith threw him a surprise party that brought together everyone they had known over their 20 years together. Friends and neighbors filled their home and spilled out into the yard, sharing food and stories and laughter. Sarah and Thomas gave speeches about their father, about the man he was, and the example he set. James simply said, "My father taught me that a real man stops when someone needs help, and he never stops being there for the people he loves." Faith watched Lucas's face as their children spoke, saw the tears he tried to hide, the overwhelming emotion of being honored by the people he loved most. When it was her turn to speak, she stood and said simply, 21 years ago, I was sitting on a church step, believing my life was over. This man stopped when no one else did. He said someone was a fool, and he was not. That is who Lucas is. He is the man who stops, who stays, who builds a life worth living. He is the man I chose and who chose me, and I am grateful for him every single day. The party went late into the night, and when it was finally over, Lucas and Faith sat on their porch, exhausted and happy. That was quite a speech, Lucas said. It was the truth, Faith replied. I just did what any decent person would do, Lucas protested. No, Faith said firmly. You did what very few people do. You saw someone in pain and you stopped. You gave time and care to a stranger with no expectation of anything in return. That is not common, Lucas. That is extraordinary, and you have been extraordinary every day since. Lucas pulled her close, and they sat in silence, watching the stars come out, comfortable in the life they had built together. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons. The twins graduated from school, Elizabeth choosing to become a teacher like Thomas's wife, Emma deciding to work with Faith on documenting the history of the region. James married his sweetheart in 1911, bringing her to live on the ranch in a small house Lucas helped him build. Sarah had 2 more children, giving Faith 3 grandchildren to spoil. Thomas and his wife had twins of their own in 1912, causing much laughter about how that particular trait apparently ran in the family. In 1913, Faith's book of stories was published by a small press in Austin. It did not make her famous or wealthy, but it did reach people who wanted to understand what life in the West had really been like. She received letters from readers thanking her for the honesty of her accounts, for the way she portrayed both the hardship and the beauty of that life. Lucas was immensely proud, showing the book to everyone who visited. My wife is an author, he would say, beaming. She turned our life into literature. It is just stories, Faith would protest, but she was pleased nonetheless. In 1916, as the world outside their corner of Texas grew increasingly troubled with war, Lucas and Faith celebrated their 25th anniversary. Their children threw them another party, but the real gift was the quieter moment afterward when Faith and Lucas sat alone in their bedroom, looking through old photographs and mementos. You remember being scared? Faith asked, looking at a photo from their wedding day. Of what? Lucas asked. Of everything, Faith said. Of taking a chance on me, of building this life, of having children. Were you ever scared, terrified? Lucas admitted. I was terrified that I would not be enough, that you would regret choosing me. I was terrified every time you were pregnant that something would go wrong. I was terrified of failing you, of not living up to the promises I made. You never failed, Faith said firmly. Not once in 25 years. Neither did you, Lucas said. You gave me everything I never knew I could have. A home, a family, a purpose. You made me better than I would have been on my own. We made each other better, Faith said. That is what love does. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own. Afterward, Faith lay in Lucas's arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling profoundly grateful for every choice that had led her to this moment. The late 1910s and early 1920s were years of watching their children build their own lives while Lucas and Faith eased slowly into the role of elders. They still worked the ranch, but James and Sarah took on more of the day-to-day operations. Faith continued to write, working on a second book. Lucas trained horses and mentored young ranchers who wanted to learn his techniques. Their grandchildren multiplied, bringing new energy and joy to family gatherings. Faith loved watching Lucas with the grandchildren, seeing how patient and playful he was, how the children adored him. She thought about the man who had stopped at the church all those years ago and marveled at the life he had built, the legacy he was leaving. In 1924, Thomas was elected as a district judge, a culmination of years of hard work and integrity. Sarah's ranch had become one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the region. James had expanded their cattle operation and was experimenting with new breeding techniques. Elizabeth was teaching at the school in El Paso, beloved by her students. Emma had published her own book, a history of the region that was used in schools across Texas. "We did well," Faith said to Lucas one evening, surveying their gathered family at Sunday dinner. "We did," Lucas agreed. "Though it is mostly you, you raised them. You shaped them into who they are." "We did it together," Faith corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you." As they moved into their 60s, Lucas and Faith finally began to slow down. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to James and his family, content to act as advisors rather than primary operators. They traveled a bit, visiting Sarah, spending time with Thomas in town, meeting with Emma's historical society. In 1928, they celebrated their 30th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. 30 years, Lucas said, shaking his head in wonder. "I was 30 when I rode through El Paso and found you. Now I am 60. More than half my life has been with you." "The better half," Faith said. "Undoubtedly," Lucas agreed. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Gerald had not left you at that church?" Faith was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I cannot imagine it would have been this good." There was something hollow about Gerald, something I did not see at the time because I wanted so badly to be chosen. But you chose me for the right reasons. You saw who I actually was, not who you wanted me to be. That made all the difference." "I saw someone remarkable," Lucas said. "And I still do, every single day." They kissed across the table, still causing sparks after 3 decades, still deeply in love. The 1930s brought the Great Depression, and while Lucas and Faith were better positioned than many to weather it, they saw the suffering around them. They opened their home to families who needed help, offering work when they could, food when work was not enough. They remembered what it was like to struggle, to build something from nothing, and they tried to ease the burden for others. "We are fortunate," Faith said more than once. "We have to share that fortune." Lucas agreed completely, and their generosity during those hard years was remembered long after the Depression ended. In 1935, Faith suffered a mild heart episode that scared both of them. She recovered, but it was a reminder that they were not young anymore, that their time was finite. They began to put their affairs in order, making sure their children knew their wishes, ensuring the ranch would pass smoothly to the next generation. "I am not ready to go yet," Faith said to Lucas one night after the doctor had cleared her to return to normal activities. "Good," Lucas said fiercely, "because I am not ready to lose you. I need you here, Faith. I have always needed you." "And you have me," Faith promised. "For as long as I can possibly stay." They made the most of the years that followed, traveling more, spending time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were beginning to appear. They attended weddings and christenings and graduations, watching their family tree expand. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence that comes from truly knowing another person. In 1939, they celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by more than 50 family members spanning 4 generations. The party was enormous, held in the big barn that Lucas and James had built years earlier. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. Thomas told the story of how his parents met, about his mother waiting at the church and his father stopping when no one else did. "My father taught us what real commitment looks like," Thomas said. "He showed us that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day. And he chose my mother every single day for 40 years. Sarah spoke about her mother's strength, about how Faith had built a home and raised children while also pursuing her own passions. "My mother taught us that women can be strong and soft at the same time, that caring for your family does not mean giving up yourself." James simply said, "My parents showed us what a real partnership looks like. They built this life together, supported each other's dreams, raised us with love and discipline in equal measure. They are the standard I measure my own marriage against." The twins spoke together, as they often did, about growing up in a house full of love and laughter, about parents who made them feel safe and valued. Elizabeth had become a mother herself and spoke about trying to emulate Faith's patience and wisdom. Emma talked about the stories Faith had written, about the importance of documenting history, of remembering where we came from. When it was finally Lucas's turn to speak, he stood with Faith's hand in his and said, "40 years ago, I was a drifter with no home and no purpose. I rode through El Paso planning to stay a few days. And then I saw a woman in a wedding dress sitting on a church step, and everything changed. She was waiting for someone who did not deserve her, who left her there alone. And I thought, what kind of fool does that? What kind of man walks away from someone that brave, that loyal, that beautiful?" He looked down at Faith, his eyes wet with tears. "I am not that kind of fool. I stopped, and she let me stay, and she gave me 40 years of the best life any man could ask for. She gave me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She gave me purpose and joy and love beyond measure, and I would do it all again, every single day for the rest of time." Faith stood and hugged him, and their family erupted into applause and cheers. It was a perfect moment, one that would be remembered and retold for generations. Lucas and Faith continued on into their 70s, slowing down but still present, still engaged with their family and community. They watched the world change around them, saw automobiles become common, saw airplanes fly overhead, saw their children embrace technologies and ideas that seemed impossible when they had first married. In 1945, as World War II ended and the world celebrated peace, Lucas and Faith sat on their porch and reflected on the life they had lived. They had seen the West transform from wild frontier to settled civilization. They had survived economic collapse and global war. They had raised 6 children who had all become good, productive people. They had accumulated more grandchildren and great-grandchildren than Faith could sometimes keep track of. "No regrets?" Lucas asked, as he often did. "Not a single one," Faith answered, as she always did. "You." "Only that I did not find you sooner," Lucas said. "But then again, maybe the timing was perfect. Maybe we both needed to be exactly who we were that day at the church for this to work." "Maybe," Faith agreed. "I was broken enough to accept help. You were wandering enough to stop and offer it. We met at exactly the right moment." "Here is to right moments," Lucas said, raising his evening coffee cup. "And to men who stop when others do not," Faith added, raising her own cup. They touched cups gently, smiling at each other with the ease of 5 decades together. Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1948, at the age of 79. He had spent the day working with James on some ranch business, had eaten dinner with Faith, had sat on their porch as they did every evening, and had gone to bed holding her hand. He simply did not wake up the next morning. Faith was devastated but also grateful that he had gone peacefully, without pain or prolonged suffering. At his funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives he had touched, who had benefited from his kindness and integrity. Their children spoke, their grandchildren spoke, and finally Faith herself stood to say goodbye to the man who had been her partner for nearly 50 years. "Lucas stopped when no one else did," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He looked at a broken woman on a church step and saw someone worth staying for. He built a life with me, raised our children, and loved me every single day. He kept every promise he ever made, and while my heart is breaking to lose him, I am so grateful for the time we had. I am grateful for every moment, every conversation, every sunrise we watched together. He was the best man I ever knew, and I will love him until I draw my last breath." Faith lived another 8 years after Lucas's death, surrounded by family, continuing to write, staying involved in her children's and grandchildren's lives. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had already had the great love of her life and needed no other. She spent her final years compiling a comprehensive family history, documenting not just the facts but the stories, the love, the choices that had shaped them all. She included the story of that day at the church, the day her life had fallen apart and then been rebuilt into something far better than she had imagined possible. Faith passed away in 1956, at the age of 77, with her children gathered around her bed. Her last words were, "Tell Lucas I kept my promises too. Tell him I will see him soon." They buried her next to Lucas in the family plot on the ranch, under the big oak tree they had planted in their first year of marriage. The headstone reads simply, "Faith Donovan, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She kept her promises." But it was the story that lived on, passed down through generations of Donovans. The story of the woman who was left waiting at the church, and the cowboy who stopped and said someone was a fool, but he was not. The story of how one act of kindness had created a legacy of love that touched hundreds of lives. The story of two people who chose each other, every single day, and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Their great-great-grandchildren still gather at the ranch, now run by James's descendants, and they sit on the porch that Lucas built and tell the story. They talk about the importance of stopping when someone needs help, about keeping promises, about building a life with intention and love. They remember that their family started with a man who saw someone in pain and decided to do something about it, who turned a moment of compassion into a lifetime of commitment. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the wind blows just right across the Texas plains, it almost sounds like two voices laughing together, still in love after all these years, still grateful for the day they found each other when one person waited and another stopped, and everything changed forever.